Hello, welcome to Classically Imperfect. I'm Mary Elizalde, one of the co-founders as well as the Director of Operations of Classically Imperfect, a mental health organization dedicated to helping classical musicians experiencing mental distress. Today, I am joined by the founders of Classically Black Podcast, Delani Harris and Katie Brown, and today we're going to be talking about the struggles of being a person of color, specifically a woman of color, in the classical music community. Hi, Delani and Katie, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. The first question for you two is, how did you get into classical music and what is your musical background?
How did I get into classical music? I started with piano as my first instrument, which I learned from a woman at my church. My mom just wanted to put me and my sister in as many things as possible. So we used to take piano lessons together. Like we would just share a piano lesson. And I absolutely hated the piano. So I quit. And then I missed it, and then I went back, and then I realized I still hated the piano. I think I just wanted to play an instrument, but I just didn't, want to play the piano. So I went to Youth Orchestra Los Angeles. I got off the waiting list for that, and there's sort of like, I mean, you were in Yola, but for those who don't know, there's sort of like a musicianship class, and then you tell them what instruments that you might want to play, and then you go into like a meeting, and then they kind of put your list with what they need and like make a decision. And like right before I went into my meetings, I was on the older side of the kids. Like when I first got into the program, right before I went into the meeting, my mom was like, "What about the bass?" And I was just like, I mean, I've never really thought about it. I don't really care. And then like when we went into the meeting, they were like, "So we think you should play the bass." So that's just kind of how that happened. It wasn't really an instrument that I chose, but it worked out in a way, and was, I think, the right instrument for me. So that's sort of like how I got into it.
I started playing the viola in my school's music program. I always played the viola. I know like some people, be switching. I've always played the viola, and I didn't really even know what it was. My friend played the viola, and she played it the year before, and she was like, "You should play the viola," and I was like, "Okay." Like I didn't even know what it was, and I also like I wanted to play the trumpet. I signed up for both, but my teacher ended up putting me in viola. And I just stuck with it. Like I don't like, I mean, obviously like I had music experience, like music my classical music experience like at church, but like formal music education started in fourth grade and just by chance.
So our first official question that I have for you two is, what is one thing you believe the classical music community as a whole can change to help people of color feel more included and safe?
The field of classical music, I don't this might sound maybe because we've been doing this for so long, but I feel like some of the initiatives are helping, but like a lot of times it doesn't really seem like they really care about our comfort or if we feel represented or anything like that, especially a field that's like so rooted in quote unquote tradition. They're not really, it's going to be a slow change. I think for me personally, I found the most support by finding people that look like me and leaning on our collective support. I don't know. It's hard for me to say like what they should do when it seems like we're reaching the capacity of what they will do in terms of fellowships and barely programming Black and Brown composers and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think one of my, I guess, most recent experiences, I mean, it's been a couple years now, was like just being in school, and like while I was there, um, not having like anything like a Black Students Union or anything like that, especially at like a conservatory that was pretty small. So that's something that like I started, but I think to Katie's point about like the initiatives and stuff, like it seems like the ones that are most geared towards helping us are the ones that like we're just like, okay, fine, I'll do it myself. And it's just like it's just not really, also it's not really fair to us, because like while other people are getting to have time to practice and stuff because they don't feel not included and they don't feel like not supported in their community, I'm in meetings and planning Black Student Union events and like doing all this stuff. And it's like I'm happy at the result of that I can make other people at my school feel included. But it's also like it was a very exhausting year for me to start and be the president of an organization like that. So I think like the institutional support has to go like beyond the surface level, because like especially when you look at like fellowships and things like that, like there's obviously a pipeline issue and there are some organizations that are trying to address that, but I think this like multiple like parts of the pipeline are not speaking to each other. And so like when you get to a certain point of it, like with fellowships for example, it's like a lot of people getting fellowships are people that would have got a job anyway, not all, but like for some of them. And so then you have people who like have multiple like programs at different points in the pipeline, but like someone from a program earlier in your pipeline could never get to whatever program you have like further down. Like I'm not trying to name any names, but like, you know, some people are not like preparing, I think, people properly for the world that is classical music. And I think that kind of contributes to the steep drop off that we see after a certain point of people of color continuing in the classical music field.
Most classical musicians tend to usually stick to classical music, which I understand because that's how all of us grew up, like listening to classical music and studying classical music. But how important do you think a divergent repertoire is, and how suggest we expand this as a community?
Great question for the educator in the room.
Okay. I often like find myself, I think even recently, maybe the past couple of months, I was trying to learn um like a jazz song. I think it was something like by Bob Gillespie. It wasn't Bob Gillespie, it was somebody. Anyway, and I was like, dang, this is a lot harder than it should be, because I feel like I have like multiple degrees in music and I took one jazz course, and that's like not enough, you know. And I always think about like how limited I feel sometimes as a musician, because like although I'm very proud of like what I've accomplished as a violist, I feel like I can't do much. Like you could give me 80 pieces, I could learn whatever, you know. Like I feel confident saying that I put a lot of time into the viola. But it's like you take music away from me, you ask me to um improvise, like it's a mess. Like I hate doing it. I'm trying to work on it on my own, but like no one encouraged me to do that. It was like me who was like, I feel that, you know, you do what you want. I mean, I think that like I think the issue for me is less about like the music specifically and more that I feel like classical music can be more open to people having other interests within just as a musician. And I think we're seeing a lot more of that. Um, but classical music requires you to be diligent to it. That's how it's just so specific. It is done a certain way. And if you want to be in spaces to create classical music at a professional level, you must learn it that way. You see, it's just a highly specialized thing. And so the result of that is almost this praise for being one dimensional. And I think once we can break away from that, we're starting to see more multi hyphenate classical musicians, which is hard to do because for reasons that I said previously. Then I think we can get to, well, you know, well, what music did you grow up listening to? Because I didn't grow up listening to classical music. I didn't start listening to classical music probably till college. I mean, I started playing viola in fourth grade. It's just not what was playing in my home. And so I think that's like, for me, when I hear that question, that's the bigger issue. Like, how can we inspire musicians to embrace their lives outside of the practice room, outside who are you when you're not a musician? Then we'll see more of a desire to learn other styles. We'll see changes in curriculum, and this is not an overnight. I don't even know if that's going to be like in my lifetime, because classical music moves so incredibly slow. But I think like just encouraging people to be people, not to be musicians, then we can get to that problem or addressing that.
Yeah, I think I have a similar experience of like just feeling after a classical music education not like a well-rounded musician, and like I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of classical musicians that don't feel that way, but like just with the whole like I can do notes on a page, and like I just remember graduating from school and just being like, I feel like as like to the amount of time that I've dedicated to being a musician, that feel like I should be more versatile than this. And I think a part of that also is that like classical music is treated as foundational in a way that other musics are not. So it's like I think that classical music is a highly specialized like field, and like especially the way it's set up, like you have to learn how to do it in the way that like the industry operates. But like also I think the industry needs to look at why they think that classical music is the foundation of music, and other people need to learn. Because when you go to a conservatory, like Katie said, like not having to take like a jazz class, or like only having taken one, all the jazz players got to take our classes. They got to take, like, before they do jazz theory, at least where we were at, they have to do classical music theory, they have to do some classical music history, and we don't have to do any of their stuff. And I think that kind of speaks to like a hierarchy in like repertoire.
I definitely agree. I personally have never had the opportunity to take any classes outside of classical. And I think it's really great how specifically Yola is kind of bringing more like Hispanic and other composers with different music styles other than classical music into our repertoire. And this next question is specifically for Delaney. How has growing up in Los Angeles affected your musical identity? For example, you and I were both in Yola, a free music program that provides free classes and lessons. And me personally, I didn't get private lessons until around 3 years ago. And we both went to Loxa actually.
Yeah.
And I feel like I go to a school and run into people in the music industry who have had lessons their whole life, and I just feel so behind sometimes because I learned my first concerto when I was 14 years old, and these kids have been playing like Suzuki since they were like 5, and I sometimes I just don't know how to handle that, or like I find myself comparing myself to them. Did this affect you at all, or what made you want to continue to do music?
uh, I think that the programming and like the resources of Yola have grown so much since
Yeah.
I left too. So I think um just speaking from experience, I think a lot of you guys are in a much better place. And I know that sometimes that doesn't mean anything when you're like in it and you have all those things going on around you. It still feels like, oh my gosh, like these people have such a head start. And like in a lot of ways they do, because yeah, when you go to Loxa, you meet people who take lessons with people in the LA Phil, and you've never had a private lesson before, and it's like it can be a bubble in a program like that, because it's a very specific like structure, the L system inspired program, and things like that. So I definitely ran into that because I got a scholarship to go to Interlochen when I was this was the summer between my sophomore and my junior years of high school. And Interlochen, and I was dead last, 100% the worst bass player there. And just being like, and like that's what my teacher wanted for me, because in Yola that was not the case. And he was like, I want you to go somewhere and get your butt kicked, because like there's more, if you want to do music, there's more out there than this. And like, but that was also just like crazy. Like there was just such a learning curve, and there was just like so much I didn't know. Like it was like locks on steroids, like kids playing stuff. I can't even freaking believe it. But if there's any like solace as to like how that, I guess, I mean, it made me want to continue, because obviously like you can see what's possible for people in your age group, but also just beyond that, what made me want to continue, and hopefully other people too, is that even though I went to Interlochen and was dead last, I also ended up going to Eastman and being in the studio, and two people that I was there at Interlochen with were in my studio. You guys took the same audition I did, and like 2 years later, here we are, together. And I also went to Eastman with more people that were at Interlochen that year. So I think it's great to see like the progress that can be made when you have like a support system like there is in Los Angeles with Yola. And also just to like never count yourself or anybody out.
Yeah, thank you. My next question is, what was your experience as two female Black musicians at Eastman? Do you feel there was enough inclusion, diversity at your school, or if not, what resources did you wish that you could have had?
I feel bad answering this because I know like I had a very unique experience at Eastman. I had a freaking blast. Like when I talk to other people who went to other conservatories or maybe were other Black people who were at Eastman at a different time, we don't have the same experience, but I had a blast. Like I was in I don't know, like my life was a movie back then. I'm so sorry. Like it just was like I had a Black viola teacher who completely believed in me. I could do whatever I want. He supported it. He said, I mean, he would like roast me a little bit, but he would like if I tell him anything, he'd be like, all right, so this is what you have to do. It was never like, I don't know, or like it was never any of that, which made me feel very empowered and really in charge of like what I wanted to do. And like it gave me freedom to like dream about stuff. I had like there was Black music education faculty, and I still have a bond with that professor. Like I spoke to her a couple weeks ago for a long time. Like I met Delaney at Eastman. We started Classically Black. My first year at Eastman was a little different because the culture was not what I left it. But the second year, like the Black people really like came together and we started hanging out. Also, like my Rochester experience, I pledged a historically Black sorority while I was in Rochester. So my experience is just not. I feel like it's like one of those things where nobody had that experience. Like I can't speak on it. Like I had the time of my life, and I learned a lot. I was at my dream school. Like, yeah, I have no complaints. Good time, great times. In fact, you gotta ask somebody else. I'm so sorry. Like, it could have been more diverse. Yeah, of course. There was 20 of us, 900 people at the school. That sucks. Notice you asked as a woman, like I didn't because I was also like so much in music ed, so like I'm sure there was like misogyny, but like I just did not have I just had a blast at Eastman. We could talk about other places.
I'm glad to hear.
But like I had a really good
Yeah, I don't know about I mean I guess sound like your I don't know how many years were you in Rochester? 4?
time. Me? I mean
You were
total
at
of 4.
Eastman.
At Eastman 3, yeah. Was
Yeah.
that 4 years? Yeah, 4 years, but 3 at Eastman.
And then you was probably head in the sand for your first year. That's probably why it was like whatever.
Yeah, cause I was just so like I'm at Eastman, like
Yeah, it's like
right inside my city. Like I was like, yo, I broke in here. Like that's crazy.
okay.
Like I did it with the whole first year was like Eastman started getting my nerves so second year. Cause like that's when it's like you see it, that's for anything, right? Like no matter how much you want something, there's another side. So it's like, okay, like yeah. But the first year, like I had good friends the first year, like yeah, I was lit.
I would say one of the differences is that like Katie was in grad school at Eastman and I was an undergrad.
That's
So I spent a lot more time there. Yeah, I was living in the dorms. I was doing a whole other situation now. But I too feel like I mean once we got into that stride of like when we had that community, like it was a lot of fun to be able to have the Black Students Union stuff. The catch is like, of course, that wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for us, and so that would have been one of the things that I wish was different, because I wasn't actually able to start it at the time that I wanted to. And eventually, when we found sort of like a loophole to be able to start the Black Students Union because there were so few Black people there, it a lot of it was really great community wise, and that helped. But I mean, to what I was talking about earlier, like when you have a group like that where there are so few people who identify, the burden to keep something like that going, because it is work to functional organization, falls on so few people, and few people actually want to do work, which, like when it comes to something that's like not necessarily for your personal benefit, like because there are times at the Black Students Union where like, I'm not doing, it's an event that like I don't want to go to this, but there might be people here who would, so I'm going to work on it. And so I think I would have liked more institutional support for something like that. The plus to that is that they now have that, because since I left, they have the George Walker Center for Diversity and Inclusion, and that is like an Eastman run like office specifically for supporting like diversity and inclusion initiatives. So even though there were things that I wish that were different when I was there, I also like, I did a lot of diversity stuff when I was at Eastman. I was Student Association Diversity Chair. I was on the Diversity Committee. I was Black Students Union President. I was on the Eastman Action Coalition for Commission for Racial Justice, and that was during the pandemic when I was waking up at 6 a.m. doing meetings. So you got to know, like, I love Eastman, like, and I'm really glad I went there. That was my first choice school, and I did all that stuff because I wanted it to be better for other people. And I really do think it is better now than when I first got there. So yeah.
That's great though. Like you kind of opened the door for people who came after you. And I feel like that's kind of what we're trying to do too, just like build a community to specifically talk about mental health within classical music. Because me personally, I don't think anyone really talks about mental health within the classical music community. Leads me to my next question. Do both of you feel that there are enough mental health resources within our community?
No. No. So, I mean, thank you guys for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I hesitated because I didn't use the resource. I know there was some stuff at Eastman, but I was mentally well back then, so I don't.
Not back then. Not back in those days.
So I tried glass. It was great. So I know there's some things, but I know there's so many people. There's so many people struggling. I mean, towards the end it got a little rocky, I will say, but in general, no. I mean, I think we're just having a mental health conversation. That's not even classical music's initiative. That's just, if you're online, people have been more open about mental health, and even that's a little dangerous because there's so many words that are being misused, and everybody's an expert, and the people who actually know what they're talking about are getting pushed down in a way. So, but I would say no, of course.
Yeah. I feel like there's a larger conversation, like you said, happening about mental health, that like, because so many people are really like, I mean, the pandemic, like people just being in the house, there's been, of course, like an impact. A lot of people have lost people recently, and people have like had financial troubles due to that. Some people have not, freaking student loan stuff is about to come up. I got my email talking about your deferment period is up. I'm like, I don't know what you're telling me that for. Like worrying about how they're gonna pay their rent. Like there's so many factors in our world today that are like just like beating down on people's mental health. And so like that's a larger conversation that's happening. And then there's so many like specific things in not just classical music, any like discipline. So I'm sure like athletes deal with it, and artists of other types deal with it too. But I feel like there also needs to be, things like this that are specific to classical musicians. And like we were saying, like even if we didn't use those like resources then, and like in some cases didn't need them, but some people probably need them and didn't use them, that's also an issue that we need to look at. Why did people feel like they couldn't or shouldn't, or like maybe feel like they weren't supposed to need them? Because a lot of these behaviors that cause these mental health issues are normalized to the point where you're thinking like, oh, this is normal. It's like, it's really not. You should talk to somebody, and yeah, I think I say this all the time, but like classical music is a discipline where you have to receive a lot of criticism, and from other people and from yourself. and like you literally go, you work all week, and then you go into a room and somebody tells you like all the things you got to change. Like obviously that's a very oversimplification of what lessons are, but like it's like a constantly, okay, how do I improve this? How do I improve this? And like people don't really think of that, and it can be a difficult place to be if you don't prepare for it. So I would love to see what comes of these initiatives, advocating for better mental health in classical music.
Thank you both for joining me today. If you want to learn more about Classically Imperfect, make sure to check out our Instagram and click the link in our bio. Thank you so much again, and bye.